It was the last thing I remembered before my dad's passing. The first time I saw it. I was 8 years old at the time. It was dark outside my bedroom window and my eyes had a familiar burn. Tears dampened my young cheeks. My breath stuttered as it visited my lungs. What I'm sure was once a roaring cry had simmered down to a few sniffles. I tried to occupy my mind with the meaningless task of twirling my favorite multicolored ink pen in spirals at my desk. With the bright red cam pressed down, I drew little fire tornadoes on the white page. That was when I heard it. A long-winded string of notes that announced the arrival of an upbeat and jumpy tune from an accordion. The joyous tune narrowed my brow briefly before shooting a wide-eyed grin across my face. The song gave me vivid images of clowns slapping pies into one another, daring trapeze artists soaring through the air, and humongous elephants tooting their trunks on a grand stage. I was convinced a great show awaited me, and it seemed all I had to do was open my closet. I got to my feet and sliced the path of my chair legs into the wood floor. I wiped the final tear from my eye and made my way to the closet door. Each step I took caused the old floorboards to creak beneath me, and with each step the notes of the accordion hit my ears faster. The song was frantic as I stood in front of the doorknob. I imagined the accordionist soaked in a puddle of sweat as his fingers flew across the keys. I paused at the door as if he could see me. As if he would say, "Hurry up kid, I'm dying here," as his bright red face puffed for air. I giggled at the thought, but decided to relieve him of his misery by turning the knob and swinging it open. Nothing. At least nothing new. Just my clothes hanging from the rod, my cowboy bed set that was far too cool for a frigid night such as this one, and a metal baseball bat resting on the floor. A moment of disappointment came to me, but hope was still present in the form of a song. The accordion was still frantic, if not even more so. It was also a little louder. It took me a moment to realize that the song wasn't coming from the closet. I noticed that I couldn't tell where it was coming from by tracking the sound. I only knew, as if it were innate to my being, that the sound was coming from the attic. I smiled, realizing that the circus may have still come to my house. Only a thin sheet of wood separated the attic from my closet. It rested in its slot at the top of a steep, wooden slope with 5 horizontal wood planks to keep a foothold. Nerves crept into my chest, but excitement outweighed suspicion in my 8-year-old mind. The song became an onslaught of notes seemingly impossible to perform with each step I took up the slope. Once at the top, I shoved the wooden sheet cover out of the way. The song was so loud in that moment, like the accordionist crawled into my ear to play. Above, was only a void. A pitch-black square cut into the ceiling a mere inches above my head. I reached above into the pitch-black attic, fishing my hand through the pitch-black nothing. A brief panic filled me as I smacked all around the post I knew held the light switch. Mercifully it made itself known and I flicked it on with a relieving click. I hoisted myself into the now dimly lit attic. Silence was ushered in as I crossed the threshold. To my disappointment, the cone of light from the lone light bulb didn't reveal a single clown. No trapeze artist somersault through the air at daring heights. No elephant swayed as they balanced on a large concrete ball. Only the attic's common clutter. Cobwebs draped from the rafters. Decoration sentenced to dust collection for the crime of being out of season, and the husks of items once loved now doomed to the title antiques that my mother began collecting that year. However, there was at least something new. Peeking its corner into the light was a sliver of pink painted wood. I squinted to get a better look and, as if on cue, another light snapped on. A light I had never seen before in the attic. It washed the pink object in a coat of light. It was a puppet theater. The pink was embroidered by intricate blue and gold patterns, surgically eased onto the piece by a loving artist's hand. The artist, I determined, belonged to centuries past as I observed the chips, cracks, and splinters given to the wood by time. A mural was painted on the front of the theater. It depicted a child dancing with strings that descended from the misty edges of the painting and tied taut around the child's joints. Above it was a stage concealed by royal blue curtains. The attic light dimmed to a minuscule glow. Then, a spotlight snapped on and cut a circle of floor from dim lighting. It startled me at first. I was certain it didn't exist before, but still I happily took it as an invitation and stood in its center. The curtains drew to reveal a forest of trees hand-cut from construction paper and pasted on a white backdrop. Though I couldn't see the instrument itself, the accordion played a relaxed melody to set the scene. In the bottom left corner of the stage was a hand puppet of a deer. It stretched to show it nubby, finger-filled arms and plastic antlers glued to its head. Then it tucked into a ball and fell asleep with a comical snore. The melody eased to an end, and after a pause only filled by snoring, a new puppet jumped from underneath the stage. It was a bear puppet. The bear jerked its head to the sleeping deer, then me, then back to the deer, then back to me. The accordion played a trill of notes with each whip of its head. The exaggerated gestures made me laugh. Then it put its nub arm spiked with a pointy claw over its mouth and shushed with a long hiss. The accordion stopped briefly. The bear began sneaking up to the deer, bouncing and swaying to the repetitive notes of the accordion. Then with a swell in the song the bear huffed and huffed and huffed, and shot out a sneeze that boomed through the attic, accompanied by a clatter of tumbling notes from the accordion. I laughed again, until the deer popped its head up and froze me in an instant. It looked around the stage, then to me. It yawned and fell back asleep. I was relieved that we weren't caught. The bear looked at me again and said, "SHH." I mimicked his gesture to show my understanding. His sneaking continued, comically bouncing to the accordion until he stood over top of the sleeping deer. He looked at me again. Covering his mouth with both hands, he let out a snicker. I did the same, feeling mischievous with our shared little secret. Then the bear raised his claw into the air, and plunged it into the deer, just below its chin. My eyes shot wide open, my mouth agape at the display. The deer laid there. It choked and gasped for air. Crimson liquid pooled in its mouth as it tried to move its lips. I watched in shock as the stab left the poor deer puppet drowning in its own blood. Then in an instant, I was in bed and it was morning. I dismissed it as a dream at first. A vivid dream, but a dream nonetheless. It was an accident. My mother repeated to me that morning as she choked on her sorrow. It was hard to wrap my head around what she said. To an 8-year-old boy, his father is indestructible. How could a simple fall take him out of our lives? My mother couldn't handle the fact either. For the next couple of years, her mind protected her through constant fear. She pulled me from school shortly after. She replaced my education with books. Some bored me into exhaustion to read, but I had to complete one before she would get me another. My favorites were always westerns. Especially when a lone, courageous sheriff would defeat the odds and save the town. Any time I remembered being scared, I pictured myself in a 10-gallon hat with an iron revolver strapped to my hip. Each time my mom handed me a new book, I donned the outfit. Nothing scared me more than seeing her hand grow thinner, and thinner, and thinner as the paranoia starved her. Until she left without a trace when I was 10. Her disappearance was the final broken stone in a path to my grandma's spare bedroom. I watched a light rain speckle the window. The inhospitable circumstances of the past 2 years left my memory almost entirely frozen. My grandma's brittle, age-speckled hand soothed my upper back with gentle circles as she attempted to melt the frigid prison away. I could hardly feel it. My only thoughts were with my mother. Where had she gone? Why did she leave? "You're going to be okay." My grandma spoke with the same gentleness of her hand. As though her words could soothe the questions that chewed at me. I pulled my eyes from the window and met hers. Through her pupils I could see the sorrow was mutual. She forced a smirk across her face which lit a candle of happiness in my endless shadows of worry. I wanted to reciprocate but couldn't manage. All I could do was ask the question that chewed at me the most. Was it my fault? I whimpered. The question was like a rock lodged in my chest. I barely found the air necessary to speak it. She reached for my cheeks with both hands as if to stop the flood from a pipe that just burst under the pressure. She shook her head no, frantically. You can always talk to me, she assured me. I wanted to tell her anything I could but I didn't know what to say. I had barely any recollection of the past 2 years. Instead, I gave her my promise through the slight nod of my head that I would, someday. She pursed her lips and reciprocated the nod to accept that I couldn't yet. I love you, you know. Until there's nothing left, she said with care. I was overcome by a full smile for a brief instant. A rare occurrence since my father's passing. She stood and glanced over her shoulder back at me. One last glance before leaving for the night. After she disappeared behind the click of a door, I realized I didn't care that I had nothing to say. I wanted to ask her every other question that raced through my mind but I stayed silent in fear of what may come out. I was afraid to burden her with finding answers she didn't have. With the imagined cowboy hat on my head and pistol on my hip, I determined it wouldn't be the brave thing to do. I knew I needed to find what happened to my mom, and my only hope for answers lay hidden in the old house. So I opened my bedroom window, grabbed my flashlight and went to find them. I made it after a 30-minute hike across town. It was a small single-story home. The shingles had gaps in their uniform pattern. The plastic shutters were left cracked and chipped. Shadows swayed over the broken walkway, cast by the hip-high grass in the front yard. A blue tarp still whipped in the breeze, covering a broken window at the side of the house. Strangely, I remember it being broken after my father's passing but not the faintest inkling of how. I rushed up to the front porch, avoiding all the snakes my mind imagined in the tall grass. I rummaged in my pocket for my key to the door. I stuffed it into the lock and with a twist, the door popped open. The blankets were still clumped up on the couch. Porcelain knickknacks remained intact on the dining room shelves from my mother's collection. Pictures of us still hung in their original position. I could have easily convinced myself I still lived there if it wasn't for a subdued musky scent sneaking onto my palate. I walked down the hall letting the beam from my flashlight guide the way. My room was just across from my parents'. I noticed a silver bolt lock drilled into my bedroom's door frame from the outside, left unlocked. Something I don't remember being there but I decided to leave it alone. I entered my parents' room, darting the flashlight beam around to see the familiar furniture. A bed, a nightstand, and a matching set of drawers were dispersed around the room without reason. Deep gashes striped the bedroom floor, heavily clustered in front of the entrance. I dug through drawers of clothing and items accumulated over a lifetime too valuable for the trash, yet not valuable enough to be seen. I rummaged through my dad's old sock drawer, left untampered since his passing. My finger collided with a cold object. I recovered it from the depths of the sock drawer and displayed it in the full light of the flashlight. It was all too familiar. A collapsible pocket knife with a royal blue handle glistened in my hand. Seeing the object brought a memory back to me. My dad sat me down at the edge of my bed months before his accident. He told me stories of frigid November mornings with his father. They watched the sun rise from tree stands, the barrels of their rifles pointed at the grass below as they hoped a deer would manifest in the crosshairs. Most of the time it never did. Their time was spent talking in hushed tones. But, the rush that could be felt when a deer actually appeared. He used that blue-handled pocket knife to dress them each time. Once he handed it to me, I ran a finger along its 4-inch blade. His childhood was not kind to its edge and I hoped that mine wouldn't be either. I kept it by my side any time I could. I asked myself, then why would it be buried in my dad's sock drawer? My memory was no use. Nor was it any use in recalling why brown specks clung to the blade. Rust? Dear blood? It was hard to tell in the flashlight glow by my inexperienced eyes. But I knew it wasn't going to bring me any closer to finding my mom. So I tucked it into my pocket and continued the search. I scoured under the bed and behind the furniture only to reveal clumps of dust. I checked in the closet, pushing aside luggage bags and parting the clothes on the rod. Behind them was a wood panel, fastened to its frame by a single black screw. Though I had no recollection of its presence in my mother's closet, it opened a chasm in my stomach. It felt so deep that my heart sank into its depths. I slammed the closet door and pinned it shut against my back. Defeated, I slouched and tried to fight back tears. I put the imaginary cowboy hat on once again as I clenched my jaw and scowled the tears back. I grinded my teeth at the thought of being nearly brought to tears by something I couldn't even remember. I got to my feet, stomped over to the bed and gave the nightstand a hard kick that caused an immediate thud. I paused for a moment, fearing I had broken something. As if anyone was around to reprimand me for the outburst. I took my flashlight and checked under the nightstand. A book fell onto the floor. I pulled it out to see tape wrapped around the cover. I set it on the bed and felt for anything else stuck under the nightstand. Another book, roughly the same size, also taped to the nightstand. On the covers, one was written January 1, 2006, with pristine penmanship in permanent marker, and the other, 2007, in pencil. I took a moment to contemplate what I just found. Before my father's accident, my mom was dedicated to her journal. I caught her often jotting down the highlights of her day after the sunset. At the end of many pleasant days she would even invite me into her room to read her recollections. She invited me into her thoughts through the door of ink on paper. I always made a dash onto the bed to listen to her retell her day. Those memories never left me. In hindsight, it was very brave to share her vulnerable thoughts with someone. Even if that someone is just her child. I grabbed the cover, ready to turn the page with a smile on my face, but I found myself frozen. My father's accident was late in 2006. I knew I would have to get there eventually. I knew I would have to watch my mother's descent into an ever-fearful stranger. I considered just skipping through the pages quickly to find any answers as to where she might have gone. I worried I might miss something if I did, and most importantly, I missed her. I missed how she was before the paranoia and wanted to read all of her sane words that I could. So I flipped open the cover of the book titled January 1, 2006 and started reading. January 1, 2006. My New Year's resolution begins. I bought 2 journals a couple of weeks ago in anticipation. They were buy one get one, so I couldn't pass it up. I've been sitting here for at least 30 minutes trying to think of what to say. Something about a blank page is so scary. I feel like a teenager with her diary of little secrets. Anyway, little bit about myself. I am a wife of 12 years to the handsome man I met in high school, Noah. Sure, he gets on my nerves sometimes, but I still love him, I guess. I'm also the mom of 8 years to my little cub Barry. Bear is such a sweet boy. He wanted to show me an ant he found a couple days ago and got mad at me when I smacked it onto the ground. He was afraid I hurt it, so we spent the next 10 minutes looking for his little ant friend to make sure he was okay. He is such a blessing. Now, I'm plenty more than just a mother and wife. I'm also an avid antiquer. Avid might be a strong word, I just started recently, but I'm enjoying it so far. Anyways, I guess I should write down how I plan to use this journal. I want this to be a stream of consciousness. A record for my keeping, and the occasional antiques update thrown in for good measure. Mainly though, I don't want time to take moments of my life from me. They're far too precious. My eyes misted over reading it. An inevitable smile pinched at my cheeks. I didn't recall the story she told about an ant in the slightest, but it didn't matter. It was undoubtedly her. Her voice, her meticulous penmanship, it was my mother. I suppressed a sniffle with the back of my hand. After collecting myself with a hard squint before I clicked the flashlight on again. I flicked the halo of light around the dark room so I could reaffirm that I was alone and, most importantly, collect my emotions. As I turned the flashlight back to the book, it caught the shimmer of the closet door handle. Again, I felt a pit form in my stomach. An urge to run nibbled at my heels. There's nothing in the closet, I assured myself, my hand gripping my thigh where the imaginary revolver hung. I pointed the flashlight back to my mom's journal. I pinched it between my shoulder and jaw, then flipped the page. Reading further, I was met with retellings of ordinary days. Doctors and dentist appointments for each of us, my failed tryout for the baseball team that still leads to ice cream, and brief updates on her antique collection like she promised. Despite the punctured tire, the leaking water heater, and a few broken antiques at my hand, it was an ordinary, yet enjoyable time in our lives. There were occasional breaks in entries, none were more than a week, and after a break there was an apology written in the very next entry as though the book were offended. Days led to weeks, then months, and with each turn of the page dread grew from the cheery soil. Then, like a reaper, December came. December 8, 2006. To start with some good news. I got a gorgeous antique puppet theater. I thought about giving it to Bear, but he's probably getting too old for that kind of thing. Other than that, it was a pretty bittersweet day. Noah was offered a job in Savannah. The pay will be fantastic, a much-needed boost to our finances. But I hated the look on Barry's face when we told him at dinner. Now he has to fly all the way down the East Coast to make new friends and leave his old ones behind. I feel terrible for him. I could hear him crying in his room after dinner. I tried to talk to him, but how could I convince an 8-year-old that the world isn't ending when he's already made up his mind? Hopefully tomorrow will be better. This was the day. I knew that hours or minutes or even before the ink dried on the paper that my father would take his fatal fall. I knew in the next entry I would see a mountain of grief, disbelief, and pain. I hesitated before turning the page, but I decided the Band-Aid approach would be best. I flipped it without further thought. December 9, 2006. That was it. I flipped page after page past the disturbing December 9th entry and nothing was there. Simply blank pages all the way to the back cover. I closed the book and sat it aside. I paused in stunned confusion before I took the 2007 book in my hands. Its title was scratchy and messy as opposed to the previous book. What was the lie? The question rattled in my brain like a buzzing fly. I worried what the price would be to get an answer. I considered putting the books back where I found them, never to be touched again. I thought today may be the day I could talk to my grandma. Maybe I could tell her about the books and she could help. But again, I put the brave hat on and pretended a shiny badge stuck to my chest. A sheriff wouldn't burden her with his duty. So I flipped open the cover. Each entry grew less and less coherent. The words were scratched in pencil, then marker, then back to pencil, then ink with no reasoning behind the choice. The pages were left mostly white, with her message only consisting of a couple of sentences. The only common thread between them was the message. She was awoken each night by eyes staring at her from the corner. No matter what she barred the door with, she claimed that he was able to push the door open enough to slide through. I imagined a figure hunched. Its eyes were two yellow beads blinking in the dark. The rest of its form just out of reach from the streetlight's glow. I pictured it unfolding, elevating its golden beady eyes to the ceiling as my mother lay helplessly on the bed. A cool air flicked the back of my neck, freezing my bones. I jumped up and took my dad's knife and flipped it open as I slashed the flashlight's beam through the darkness. I was alone. I sighed and scolded my mind for the fright. There was no towering beast in the corner, and likely there never was. The only evidence of a watcher was written in the journal with no description beyond, he. This he continued to only watch and stalk until late January. Each entry grew less and less coherent. The words were scratched in pencil, then marker, then back to pencil, then ink with no reasoning behind the choice. The pages were left mostly white, with her message only consisting of a couple of sentences. The only common thread between them was the message. She was awoken each night by eyes staring at her from the corner. No matter what she barred the door with, she claimed that he was able to push the door open enough to slide through. I imagined a figure hunched. Its eyes were two yellow beads blinking in the dark. The rest of its form just out of reach from the streetlight's glow. I pictured it unfolding, elevating its golden beady eyes to the ceiling as my mother lay helplessly on the bed. A cool air flicked the back of my neck, freezing my bones. I jumped up and took my dad's knife and flipped it open as I slashed the flashlight's beam through the darkness. I was alone. I sighed and scolded my mind for the fright. There was no towering beast in the corner, and likely there never was. The only evidence of a watcher was written in the journal with no description beyond, he. This he continued to only watch and stalk until late January. January 21, 2007. He wants me dead. I don't know what happened, but he wants me dead. The little cubby in my closet saved me last night. It felt like hours before I finally got the screw out. I was so scared there all night. He almost got me. My eyes went back to the closet. I kept the flashlight on the book, leaving the door in its shadowy haze. Was that what scared me about the closet? Did I see my mother crawl into that tiny hole to run from the monsters conjured in her mind? Maybe that was the moment I lost her. That would explain why the dead memory haunted me. But it didn't feel right. No great revelation was born from the thought. I may have vaguely remembered my mother crawling through the entrance of the cubby, but it didn't spark the gut-wrenching dread I associated with the door. Thank you for watching part 1, like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Part 2 is in the description.